Now we come bias from over-influence by extra vivid evidence. Here's one that I'm at least $30 million poorer as I sit here giving this little talk, because I once bought 300 shares of a stock, and the guy called me back and said, I've got 1,500 more. I said, will you hold it for 15 minutes while I think about it? And the CEO of this company, I have seen a lot of vivid peculiarities in a long life, but this guy set a world record. I'm talking about the CEO, and I just misweighed it. The truth of the matter is his situation was foolproof. He was soon going to be dead. I turned down the extra 1,500 shares, and it's now cost me $30 million, and that's life in the big city. And it wasn't something where stock was generally available. And so it's very easy to misweigh the vivid evidence. Mental confusion caused by information not arrayed in the mind in theory structures, creating sound generalizations developed in response to the question, why? Also misinfluence from information that apparently but not really answers the question, why? Also failure to obtain deserved influence caused by not properly explaining why. Well, we all know people who flunk, and they try and memorize, and they try and spout back, and it doesn't work. The brain doesn't work that way. You've got to array facts on theory structures answering the question, why? If you don't do that, you cannot handle the world. And now we get to Feuerstein, who was the general counsel of Salomon when Goodfriend made his big error. And Feuerstein knew better. He told Goodfriend, you have to report this as a matter of morality and prudent business judgment. He said, it's probably not illegal, there's probably no legal duty to do it, but you have to do it as a matter of prudent conduct and proper dealing with your main customer. And he said that to Goodfriend on at least 2 or 3 occasions, and he stopped. And of course the persuasion failed, and when Goodfriend went down, Feuerstein went with him, and it ruined a considerable part of Feuerstein's life. Well, Feuerstein was a member of the Harvard Law Review who made an elementary psychological mistake. You want to persuade somebody, you really tell them why. And what have we learned in lesson 1? Incentives really matter. He should have told, and vivid evidence really works. He should have told Goodfriend, you are likely to ruin your life and disgrace your family and lose your money. And is Mosier worth this? I know both men, that would have worked. So Feuerstein flunked elementary psychology, this very sophisticated, brilliant lawyer. Well, don't you do that. It's not very hard to do, just to remember that why is terribly important. Other normal limitations of sensation, memory, cognition, and knowledge, well, I don't have time for that. Stress-induced mental changes. Here my favorite example is the great Pavlov, and he had all these dogs in cages which had all been conditioned into changed behaviors. And the great Leningrad flood came, and just went right up, and the dog's in a cage, and the dog had as much stress as you can imagine a dog ever having. And the water receded in time to save some of the dogs, and Pavlov noted that they'd had a total reversal of their conditioned personality. Well, being the great scientist he was, he spent the rest of his life giving nervous breakdowns to dogs. And he learned a hell of a lot that I regard as very interesting. I have never known any Freudian analyst who knew anything about the last work of Pavlov. And I never met a lawyer who understood that what Pavlov found out with those dogs had anything to do with programming and deprogramming and cults and so forth. I mean, the amount of elementary psychological ignorance is out there in high levels is very substantial. Then we've got other common mental illnesses and declines, temporary and permanent, including the tendency to lose ability through disuse. And then I've got mental and organizational confusion from say-something syndrome. And here my favorite thing is the bee, the honeybee. And the honeybee goes out and finds the nectar, and he comes back, he does a dance that communicates to the other bees where the nectar is, and they go out and get it. Well, some scientist who was clever, like B.F. Skinner, decided to do an experiment. He put the nectar straight up, way up. Well, in a natural setting, there is no nectar way the hell straight up. And the poor honeybee doesn't have a genetic program that is adequate to handle what he now has to communicate. And you'd think the honeybee would come back to the hive and slink into a corner. But he doesn't. He comes into the hive and does this incoherent dance. And all my life I've been dealing with the human equivalent of that honeybee. And it's a very important part of human organization to set things up so the noise and the reciprocation and so forth of all these people who have what I call say-something syndrome don't really affect the decisions. Now, the time has come to ask 2 or 3 questions. This is the most important question in this whole talk. What happens when these standard psychological tendencies combine? What happens when the situation or the artful manipulation of man causes several of these tendencies to operate on a person toward the same end at the same time? The clear answer is the combination greatly increases power to change behavior compared to the power of merely one tendency acting alone. Examples are Tupperware parties. Tupperware has now made billions of dollars out of a few manipulative psychological tricks. It was so schlock that directors of Justin Dart's company resigned when he crammed it down his board's throat. And he was totally right, by the way, judged by economic outcomes. Mooney conversion methods. Boy, do they work. He just combines 4 or 5 of these things together. The system of Alcoholics Anonymous. A 50% no drinking rate outcome when everything else fails. It's a very clever system that uses 4 or 5 psychological systems at once toward, I might say, a very good end. The Milgram experiment. See, Milgram, it's been widely interpreted as mere obedience. But the truth of the matter is that the experimenter who got the students to give the heavy shocks in Milgram, he explained why. It was a false explanation. We need this to look for scientific truth and so on. That greatly changed the behavior of the people. And number 2, he worked them up. Tiny shock, little larger. So commitment and consistency tendency and the contrast principle were both working in favor of this behavior. So again, it's 4 different psychological tendencies. That's when you get these Lollapalooza effects, you will almost always find 4 or 5 of these things working together. When I was young, there was a whodunit hero who always said, cherchez la femme. And what you should search for in life is the combination, because the combination is likely to do you in. Or if you're the inventor of Tupperware parties, it's likely to make you enormously rich if you can stand shaving when you do it. Then one of my favorite cases is the McDonnell-Douglas airliner evacuation disaster. The government requires that airliners pass a bunch of tests. One of them is evacuation. Get everybody out. I think it's 90 seconds or something like that. It's some short period of time. The government has rules, make it very realistic, so on and so on. You can't select nothing but 20-year-old athletes to evacuate your airliner. So McDonnell-Douglas schedules one of these things in a hangar, and they make the hangar dark, and the concrete floor is 25 feet down, and they got these little rubber chutes, and they got all these old people, and they ring the bell, and they all rush out, and in the morning, when the first test is done, they create, 20 terrible injuries that will go off to hospitals. By the way, they didn't meet the time schedule either, in addition to causing all the injuries. Well, so what do? They do it again in the afternoon. Now they create 20 more injuries and 1 case of a severed spinal column with permanent unfixable paralysis. These are engineers, these are brilliant people, this is thought over through in a big bureaucracy. Again, it's a combination of attendance. Authorities told you to do it. He told you to make it realistic. You've decided to do it. You've decided to do it twice. Incentive caused bias. If you pass, you save a lot of money. You've got to jump this hurdle before you can sell your new airliner. Again, 3, 4, 5 of these things work together, and it turns human brains into mush. And maybe you think this doesn't happen in picking investments? If so, you're living in a different world than I am. Finally, the open outcry auction. The open outcry auction is just made to turn the brain into mush. You get social proof, the other guy is bidding, you get reciprocation tendency, you get deprival superreaction syndrome, the thing is going away. I mean, it's just absolutely designed to manipulate people into idiotic behavior. Finally, the institution of the board of directors of a major human American company. Well, the top guy is sitting there, he's an authority figure. He's doing asinine things. You look around the board. Nobody else is objecting. Social proof, it's okay. Reciprocation tendency. He's raising the director's fees every year. He's flying you around in the corporate airplane to look at interesting plants or whatever the hell they do. And you go. And you really get extreme dysfunction as a corrective decision-making body in the typical American board of directors. They only act, again, the power of incentives, they only act when it gets so bad that it starts reflecting, making them look foolish or threatening legal liability to them. That's Munger's rule. I mean, there are occasional things that don't follow Munger's rule, but by and large, the board of directors is a very ineffective corrector if the top guy is a little nuts, which of course frequently happens.